The popular opinion to have right now is to say that Amazon is to blame for all of the downfalls of the Rings of Power show. It's Amazon's fault. Amazon hired these people. Amazon did this. Amazon did that. Amazon, Amazon, Amazon. But people seem to fail to remember that it was the Tolkien estate who actively sought out someone, a network, to make a series of television shows. And it is ultimately the Tolkien estate who has creative control or the ability to creatively say yes or no to the scripts. So at the end of the day, their involvement, the Tolkien estate's involvement, is what led to Amazon being the studio that got the contract in the first place. And part of that contract is that the Tolkien estate must be involved in the creative decisions along the way. So, how did we get to a point where we see the established lore of the Lord of the Rings and Middle Earth being absolutely just violated in a sense? How did we get to this point? And what part does the Tolkien estate have to play in this compared to Amazon? That's what we're talking about today. I'm Tim Anderson, aka Renfell, the bearded dwarven princess, and we're back with another Rings of Power rant. And today we're talking about how it's really not Amazon's fault completely. The Tolkien estate is who, in fact, bears much of the blame. And we're not necessarily talking about the previous Tolkien estate. We're talking about the modern day Tolkien estate, which is under Simon Tolkien, who has proven that his ultimate goal is a paycheck, not any actual adherence to the established lore and works of his grandfather. Now, up until uh, Christopher Tolkien's death, he was the literary executor, even though he did step down as the manager, so to speak, of the Tolkien estate. But even though the deal did start under his hand, the scripts were finalized under Simon Tolkien. And if you read all of the dialogue in the interviews with Vanity Fair and Hollywood Reporter, so on and so forth, the Rings of Power showrunners talked about how all of their involvement with the Tolkien estate has been through Simon Tolkien. Simon Tolkien this, Simon Tolkien that. We greeted Simon Tolkien in Elvish, and that's how we were able to, convince him that we were the right person for the job. And it was such an honor to be working with Simon Tolkien throughout the process to get his, creative consulting and input on the things we were doing with the show. So let's kind of go back. The OneRing.net has this really good breakdown how we got here, the history of the Rings of Power. Now, a lot of this isn't really doesn't really pertain to the topic that we're discussing today, but some of it does, especially the early parts of how the contract was awarded to Amazon in the first place and how that played out and the timelines, so on and so forth. Before we get any further, though, if this is your first time here, cool. Like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and do me a solid. If you like what you hear today, support the channel. It's really easy. You can either do a membership. There's 3 tiers. You can also do a one-off if you don't want to do a monthly subscription down there with a super thanks. There's more ways you can support. We'll talk about those at the end. But also don't forget, I do the Mondays at Middle-earth read through every Monday at 11 a.m. Central here on YouTube as we read through The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion ahead of, or the plan was ahead of, Season 1 of Rings of Power. It didn't happen. We're still in the middle of it. I'm just now finishing up The Two Towers as I record this episode. Actually, I got one more chapter to go. In any case, let's dive into the timeline a little bit and let's just see what blame the Tolkien estate has to bear, comparatively speaking, to Amazon. So November 15th of 2017, Amazon and the Tolkien estate announced a new alliance that the TV series rights to The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings books and everything contained in them had been signed. The deal included a ton of stipulations. Only a TV series could be made, no films or made for TV movies. It was a 5-season commitment, minimum. Had to be multiple series were okay. It must be put into production within 2 years to avoid development issues like what plagued the Hobbit films. It cannot retell what's already been told on screen. Here's the one that's really important. The Tolkien estate or family must be involved. Additional rights to characters and stories may be available on a case-by-case basis. Cha-ching, cha-ching. And there was $1 million budget given for season 1, which included the rights purchase for $250 million. Now, how does this differ from the rights Peter Jackson had? Tolkien sold the film rights to United Artists in 1968 and claimed in his naivete that those rights were sold in perpetuity, which means for all time. They would never again revert back to the family for total control. Saul Zaentz bought those rights from 1976, immediately making the animated films from Rankin and Bass and then Ralph Bakshi, and then later working with Peter Jackson. Zaentz died in 2014. His Lotra rights were sold to the Embracer Group in 2022, and Amazon acquired United Artists MGM in 2022. Things that were not included in those forever rights were to a TV series over 8 episodes long. The family realized TV production may actually be able to tell stories at quality and scale and requested pitches from all of Hollywood. Now, this was November 15th. Did they actually, at that point in time, I don't remember when it says, as of November 13th was when they actually beat out Netflix for the rights deal. But it had been going on for a while since then. So, what's important to realize here is that Amazon did not go seeking the rights to The Lord of the Rings. It was the Tolkien estate under Christopher Tolkien at the time, through a combination of his partnership with Warner Brothers, who decided that they wanted to see if there was an interest, if anybody could do justice to things with a TV show, and to basically generate money because the Tolkien estate was running low on funds at this point. So it was under Christopher Tolkien that the company decided to pursue a partnership with someone out there to create a new show, and sold the rights for $250 million, and then, very importantly, had that creative control clause in the contract to make sure that they were involved. Because very famously, throughout every single previous adaptation of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit films, the Tolkien estate was never really consulted or worked with. Matter of fact, Christopher Tolkien was very much not in favor of Peter Jackson's films, and famously has said some very nasty things about Peter Jackson, despite the fact that those films were loved by the world around. They've sued United Artists and etc. multiple times over, profits, and no love lost there. Lots of crazy issues when there's money at stake here. Shortly afterwards, Christopher Tolkien announced that he was handing over management of Middle-earth to the next generation, namely his son. His lifelong focus on the expansion of Middle-earth was primarily through book form, and with his oversight, the deal with Amazon was done, meaning our family has $250 million. We have creative insight and input into any upcoming productions, which we've never had before, and we're going to continue to generate additional profits because we're going to be involved in those TV adaptations and any and all future adaptations that are spun off from that. Creating a canvas, it says, for the next generation of Tolkien family to make their mark on the Legendarium. He would then pass away in January of 2020 at the age of 95. What's worth noting here is up until a certain point, like in May of 2018, there were rumors that the show was going to be about young Aragorn. That was obviously proven to be false. That was just one of the pitches that was presented, which, by the way, will be coming in the pipeline now that the Embracer Group bought everything, and they have a carte blanche to go out and create all sorts of shows around the legacy characters. So you can bet your ass we're going to see a young Aragorn show, a young Arwen show, a young Gandalf show. We're going to be seeing all of those, as well as a slew of video games, for better or for worse. In July of 2018, it says writers J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay had been announced as the showrunners for the Lord of the Rings series. It says at this point they were unknown to any fan with an empty IMDb page, except for an unproduced Star Trek script. They were known to Hollywood insiders as insanely talented script doctors and Tolkien uber geeks, and many people were comparing them to Game of Thrones, which had 2 unknown showrunners at the time. In 2019, Lord of the Rings sprung up this trailer, and a YouTube channel, so on and so forth. They were announced to be officially in charge, along with an all-star team of writers in 2019, with Tolkien artist John Howe and Tolkien scholar Tim Shippey, which, as I said here, the inclusion of Tom Shippey, allowed fans to breathe a sigh of relief, as a trusted name in Tolkien scholarship is on board to make sure the lore is managed fairly. September of 2019, it's announced that it's going to shoot in New Zealand. Everyone has greater interest in the show now because it's like they're getting the band back together with What a Workshop, What FX, and the Oscar-winning teams around those jumping on board. However, Um, 3 years later, in the end, they involved 1,500 digital shots from 1,500 artists from around the world with over a dozen VFX studios. Um, January 2020, production begins. COVID-19 takes over. 2020, reports of nudity um, hit the airwaves, and so on and so forth. But what's important is that in the course of all of this, by April of 2021, it was reported that Tom Shippey was off the project, later confirmed by the Tolkien professor, Dr. Corey Olson, who I've previously talked about on my channel. It says, beginning a long, intense conversation between fans and studios in the absence of official releases, incomplete information will continue to fill the air for the next year and a half. Not really. It said there was a narrative that began taking form of troubled production playing loose with the lore, which eventually was proven to be true. So it's bullshit that they call this unsubstantiated narrative. Come on, OneRing.net. You're better than that. You know it wasn't unsubstantiated. It has actually been proven to be true. Although I don't know when this was written, so could be. Anyway, going up to this point, they were still rewriting scripts and everything else, and it hasn't been finalized as far as I'm aware. What's important is that as far back as 2018, which was a year after, important thing to remember here, Christopher Tolkien stepped down from handling things after he made the deal. So he got the deal through to completion, signed the paperwork, set the family up, and then said, I'm stepping away and I'm handing things off to my son. From there on out, Simon Tolkien's in charge. And Simon Tolkien is the one who has approved any and all storyline changes, any and all script changes, everything related to this. So everything at this point lies firmly in the hands of Simon Tolkien as the executor of the Tolkien estate. Even though Christopher Tolkien was still the literary executor, he was no longer in charge of the Tolkien estate and therefore no longer involved in the day-to-day of managing the oversight on the Rings of Power. Everything was in the hands of Simon Tolkien. And Simon Tolkien has made it blatantly clear that he cares about one thing: the money. Now, he's not the only one to blame here. Christopher Tolkien also made it clear that the only thing he really cared about was the money. However, I can't say what was going on in their minds. No one at this state understands why or how they were willing to sign off on a deal that was around the Second Age when they also refused or are prohibited from selling the rights to the Silmarillion. We don't know why the rights to the Silmarillion were not included, because if they wanted to do it justice, then they would have sold the rights to that storyline. So it seems very odd to me that they wouldn't sell the rights to the Second Age, unless there's got to be something in the will somewhere from J.R.R. Tolkien himself that says no future rights can be sold. We don't know that, though. But Christopher Tolkien was obviously either blocked from allowing the Silmarillion, or was also stuck in that mentality of, I don't want to let the Silmarillion rights go as long as this family holds creative control over the copyright and it's not in the public domain, then we're going to make sure that only what's already been sold is what's allowed to be used in terms of film adaptation rights, because he's been very public, or he was very public, about how he just didn't think that it could ever be adapted into a film format. So even though he was willing to sell these rights for $250 million, he being Christopher Tolkien, it was also with the caveat of it's only going to be in conjunction with the rights that have already been sold, nothing additional beyond that. Very interesting. In any case, at the end of the day, the Tolkien estate, under Christopher Tolkien, and ultimately the script approval committee under Simon Tolkien, are the ones who we really have to blame for the travesty that is the Rings of Power. Because as much as people want to put all the hate on Amazon or the showrunners for Rings of Power, the Tolkien estate, Simon Tolkien, is the one who has creative oversight on the scripts. And if I had to guess, I would say there's probably not veto power in there, but there may be some clauses in there that allow them the opportunity to say yes or no to certain things. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what that contract looks like. But this is why I keep coming back to, I don't put all the blame on Amazon like so many other people do, because the Tolkien estate ultimately was the one who went out asking for pitches and gave the contract to Amazon because they were able to get what they wanted out of it, which was recognition for the family, creative input, and probably creative control over the things, as well as a huge chunk of the pie. Food for thought, everybody. In any case, If you liked what you heard here today and you haven't already done so, like, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Let's have a conversation below. Let me know your thoughts, any evidence that you have to support any of the information provided within this article here. Support the channel with a membership down there. There are 3 tiers. On a one-off, if you don't want to do a monthly sub, you could do a super thanks. And on premieres like this or live streams, you can do super chats and stickers. There's a Patreon page for the World, the Weave, and the Void that I'm creating with my wife and my brother. If you like video games and fantasy stories, check that out. Until next time, stay safe, happy reading. Cheers, everybody.